Hello everybody, and welcome to the LJL Officially Unofficial Podcast, episode number 21. I remembered it was mirrored, so it's also that way. Whatever, it doesn't matter anymore. I am joined by the ravishing Alex, otherwise known as Nymaera Hapgood. Yes, you have that ravishing hair, so hello. Welcome to the podcast. Hello. And of course, we have the magnetic Sam, otherwise known as Initia1ise Hapgood. Welcome, sir, to the podcast. Welcome.
Wait, no, he's in the other room. No!
Depending on your term of magnetic, obviously.
He's a physicist. What did you expect?
True. Gentlemen, welcome to episode 21 of the podcast. Lovely to have you here as always.
It's good to be here. To have you. Like, see, it's, you introduced us all the time, and we're happy to be introduced by you. You wonderful soul.
I'm the host, so I also get to throw down the hammer. So, I mean, that's why I begin on the very high note, and then I slowly chip you down.
It's rough.
But I begin you high. Because we obviously, this in podcast, I haven't even explained what it's about. Because I don't even know what it's about.
Because why are we here? Like, why
are we here? Well, gentlemen, it's to deliver the #1 coverage of the LJL for the English-speaking world. We held exclusive content coverage around us because it only has us three, the three most consistent people when it comes to covering the LJL in the English-speaking world. Yes, I'm flaming some other people. I don't care. My dick's on the table now. Come at me. That's why this podcast is all about personal thoughts.
We're like the musketeers without actually any kind of muskets, firearms of any kind. Yeah. Nor are we friends or military.
We also
anything like musketeers.
We also fully rely upon Nymaera to carry us in solo queue as the diamond player.
That's it. I'm D'Artagnan. Yeah.
Yes, that's our full claim to.
I've seen your win rate in gold. Don't add him.
Oh god, you know my win rate on my Smurf has dropped like 48%.
Oh.
Got my main, which is doing fine, like Diamond 4, Diamond 3. My Smurf is we keep that one covered up. That's the yeah.
It's how's the AD carry learning going?
Well, I've switched to jungle now. It got that bad.
Play Master Yi, it's free elo at the moment, trust me. My Smurf is enjoying playing Master Yi because people still don't know how to do it in silver gold elo. That's what you have to do.
Nope.
That's what you do.
Alright, well, there we go. Flame it, Nymaera's done.
Yes, Nymaera, I'd like to ask you the question. As you're having a nice sip of coffee. Sip of coffee. This is where the podcast is going to be. Sir, we must have some affiliation if we're doing the exclusive coverage of the LJL, or at least no one else is fully covering it except for maybe a few other people, but we're the best in our eyes.
Well, don't you know, we're having a natter over our morning coffee, as old hands do, you know, in amongst our social groups.
Our 7 p.m. morning coffee.
Haven't you heard about those Riot people that are all affiliated and do stuff under the Riot brand? We're not actually a part of that. You know, that's the secret. That's the big gossip. Turns out the LJL Officially Unofficial has nothing to do with them. Nothing to do with Riot. Nothing to do with Riot Japan or any other branch of Riot.
That is mental, that we have nothing to do with them. Absolutely mental. But then Initia1ise...
Hello, sir.
What are we representing? Who do we represent?
Only ourselves, and in fact, our own individual views. We don't even strictly represent the LJL Officially Unofficial brand within the show. These are our personal views in a personal capacity.
It gives us like free reign to have like shit-eating grins as we flame the players.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, and fully because
each other.
I've already said I've slammed my dick on the table to other people that cover the LJL in English, so like I'm gonna just re-emphasize it. So now, hello, you can tell I'm okay with it because I'm willing to do it twice in a row in the space of 4 minutes. I did that sentence 4 minutes and twice. That's Yeah, obviously anyone listening to this podcast can also find all of our social medias. That is LJL Unofficial over on Twitter, or LJL_officially_unofficial on Instagram and Twitch, or just typing in LJL Unofficial onto most search engines, you'll be able to find
We've done it now. We've cracked the algorithm. If you do that, you'll probably find us.
You'll find us.
Consistency kept us there and now has got us there, and we're slowly now coming up the Google ranks, which is the important part. You can also find this podcast on all major streaming platforms. That's all audio streaming platforms. If you find us and you don't find us on somewhere, let me know, or let any of us know, or come to our Discord and let us know, because we have a Discord server.
And we are willing to compromise.
Well, unless it's SoundCloud.
No.
Oh yeah, no, okay.
Never touch that platform.
Because they want us to pay. That's why they don't want it. They want us only to pay for them. Nobody
Do
else.
anything for love, but I wouldn't do that.
Yeah. We do a lot for love, but not that.
Not low.
Try to sound.
Man of many words.
Unless you want to
Pay
give
for
us
us.
money to then host it.
Yeah.
Then
You
we'll
gotta
do it.
sponsor us. It's like
Then
Your
do it.
sponsorship could be here.
Sponsorship could be here on all of our mugs while we're drinking. We drink
right
a
now,
lot.
I've got my Firefox Ari mug. I'm repping my main.
I got a logo I should probably blur out.
It could be your sponsor. Could be your
Could
sponsorship.
be a sponsor. They're like, look how beautifully plain this mug is. It is disappointingly plain, one might say. Look, if it had your name or your sponsorship on here, it would be just a better mug, and we all know that.
Could
What-
take a tactical coffee break and like show our sponsorship on them.
Wow, that would be next level. And
I
your
would
do
so
that.
happily do that.
and your name could be alongside this introduction as well as an exclusive spot. But we've spent about a minute pretending that we have a sponsor without having a
We don't.
sponsor. So, jeez, we're good at this one. This is going to be a fun podcast.
Yeah.
I can tell. It's going to be a fun one.
It's been a
Got
fun
off on
week
the
of
right-
League of Legends.
It has been. And week 3 of the LJL was definitely a fun and exciting one. Lots of things happened this week. I mean, so many things to cover. Gentlemen, as always, we are going to do our rundown of the teams and their current standings from bottom up. Talking about a bit of narrative, talking about just our thoughts on the team, maybe our hopes and dreams, or maybe scolding and flaming. Bit of everything. Who really knows? Let's get into our first team at the very bottom of our standings. Our darling team. I don't know if they can still be called our darling team because they're not doing much winning and it's looking a bit hopeless. It's Axis.
And this is the week
Yeah.
we kind of expected a lot out of them. Well,
Well, we said I hope for one win. I hoped for one win.
yeah,
We
particularly
did.
because they were against similarly winless Team Rascal Jester.
Yeah.
At the bottom of those standings. They were still winless after the first game. They got trashed by Sengoku. They came into this game versus Rascal Jester, and honestly, they should have won that game, and they threw away a mid-game lead of sizable amount and lost the game decisively after that point.
Yeah, like I don't want to go too hard into that game until we talk Rascal Jesters as well, because actually I do want to give some praise to members of the Jesters in that, but Hoglet's champion pool still remains an issue when you do need to be able to carry out your jungle position. Gariaru tried, and Uinyan is in an off role, but they just don't look like a squad with a carry position at the minute, and that's
Yeah.
problematic.
I would contest that a little bit because Galiardo's been trying.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's fair.
I don't know if you've got any views on that particularly, Lexi, but
I mean, Galliardo's been playing fine, but the problem is, like, his game 2, where he actually had a chance to potentially carry the game, he didn't. And he just partly was partly on a champion that isn't meant to do solo carries, right? Tristana is not meant to solo carry a game. She can allow a team and really rally a team, especially with the lead, into a good spot, but didn't transition a lot of that power over. And I mean, in all credit, Natsume was 3-1-1 at the end of that game. Could have also helped with Tristana carry. Renekton and Trist is definitely a carry game. They
it's a
didn't.
team fight combo, right? You've got someone wrecking the backline, and then Triss just starts free firing all over the place.
And they didn't
yeah.
do it. They didn't.
They didn't, and it kind of to kind of throw an analogy out there, or rather a comparison. If you remember that one series between Team Liquid and TSM, the 5-game one, where there was a huge throw in game 5
Of course
from
I fucking
TSM.
know. Yeah.
Sure. But like, so like a lot of people flamed, the one moment where Sven kind of got caught out and all that other stuff. But largely, some of the other voices within the analytical league community said, look, TSM just didn't rotate their point of power in this really fat Akali around the map. You can't excuse that. The same thing for me comes up with Axis here, where they had Gadiardo get solo level 2 first blood under tower, gets out with only burn and ignite versus Pink. So he's playing Tristana into Malzahar, which is Pink's kind of fallback pick, which is a bit weird because no one else is really playing that across the world right now. He has a huge lead, and he just can't leverage it across the map. They're not pushing down towers. They're not taking all the objectives they need to, and they get stalled out until the point where Rascal Jester have enough items to turn around teamfights, particularly around an Ezreal pick. And this is really worrying for Axis now, because even if they have a clear lead, in spring they had a way to kind of bring that over the finish line. They just couldn't do it here, and it's against weak opposition.
Yeah, and there was an issue as well where you saw Gary Arrows trying to trade like tier 2 turrets for objectives and not quite getting them. So you get 2/3 of the health bar, but no trade. And so actually what you end up trading is no gold for an objective. They lost dragons that way. They lost a turret or two that way. And that kind of thing where you're trying to trade and not quite making it as well can really hurt you, especially in that kind of mid game when you do have that lead and you end up getting stalled as kind of a result of it. And the Malzahar in particular that was so far behind ended 6-5-5, being out coming out the laning phase like 1-4 or something. Like, I mean, that is kind of insane.
In all credit, though, to a player that we haven't spoken about yet is Corporal. Corporal played a pretty proactive game on that Pantheon against Sengoku.
Yeah,
it looked promising at moments. Yeah, sure, you sadly, Eunyan went 0-5 and Hogwarts went 0-4 and Natsume went 0-4, so it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter how good your Pantheon looks. The rest of your team are hard inting it down. And in all fairness, that's kind of how that game against Sengoku went. Whereas I would like to see him do the exact same against lower, weaker teams where potentially we've seen Proud do this on like that set a bunch of times, just doing it, coming in out of nowhere, face breaker. Oh, suddenly we can now win this game. We can win this team fight. I want to see more of maybe Corporal having to play more of a carry support role. Pike could be in the set is definitely there. We're not seeing many Pike internationally, so Pike is a
Pike's in a weird spot right now. Although they are buffing him in the next patch for the support role.
That's my thought, yes.
So maybe in the future. But I think particularly Set has the ability to impact team fights as a support.
And his Pantheon, in my eyes, was fine.
He was fine. There was
arguably
one point
the best out of the whole team, so I mean...
We'll have a bit of a talk about how many globals we've seen cropping across the LJL later, because I think Pantheon support does kind of play into that. Because it's a very different way to start off team fights, because you have to be very certain about tracking people in the jungle, and that a lot of that comes down to the synergy and cohesion of your team. How's the communication working? When you've got substitutes in the roster, that's obviously going to take a hit. However, after 3 weeks of playing on stage and however much time they had to practice that,
well, 1 week was on stage, 2 weeks online.
Sorry, yeah, 3 weeks of games, and that is another point. These were played in person this week, which is great for the LJL. And yeah, shut up, you. But particularly Corporal is someone who has been more proactive than the rest of his teammates in terms of playmaking and stuff. There was one play in the mid lane where they try and use the Pantheon ult onto Pyrion, I think it was, and it kind of goes a bit awry. It goes a bit awry. It gets turned around on them, and it kind of shows how Axes are trying to make the right plays. The execution is just not there. Not there yet. And now sitting at 0-6, not looking good.
I mean, if I could step in a little bit there before we kind of
go for it.
Move on as well. Like, I think I do want to call back to the point you're making about communication. And even from when they found themselves in passable positions, like say versus the Jesters, we're seeing the mid-game decision-making being sloppy, the calls being split, and they're not quick or clean enough. Like a really good example was Hoglet on the Fiddlesticks had an amazing flank position on the Fiddlesticks, out of vision in the Dragon Pit as the Jesters were about to come in. They then, for whatever reason, changed their minds about what they're doing and decide to go face check a bush. Hoglet dies as Cog comes in, gets knocked up by the Orn, blown up before he can use a stopwatch. The super fed Fiddlesticks that got miles ahead because of the way Fiddlesticks can farm dies. They start at a disadvantage of like 1 or 2 men, and that kind of thing happening around going for turrets in the mid game. How are they setting up around dragons in the mid game? Is problematic when you are just making split or unclean calls.
Yeah, and this has been happening from week 1. And it's continued.
We need to see improvement. We need to see improvement. And now, like, if I was Axe's coach, and of course, Coach Yang, I believe, is still out of the country because of travel restrictions. Although I'm not sure if that's going to change sooner rather than later. Hopefully it will, for the sake of
it's visas is the big deal here. It's visas just not coming through, which is it can be very long-winded. I mean,
I don't know because they had contracts signed for up until November, December, I believe. Actually, yeah, they were re-signed. So I presume that with the contracts re-signed, they needed visa signing for that. Of course, that's all speculation. Could be completely wrong about that. If you do know something, let us know, because that'd be really useful to know. But if you don't have your coach in the country either to sort out these problems, then how are they expected to improve? Well, of course, they got enough players to hopefully have that experience to do stuff beforehand. But it's a new group of players. And yeah, at this point, I'm like, 0-6. They came back from 0-4 and scrapes in with 1 win over the boundary for spring playoffs. I am wondering how they do that this split, if at all.
Well, we'll have to wait and see if Axis can pull it back. And well, we're hoping for you. We're cheering for you, but it's not going to be an easy one next week either, as you've got some good teams coming at you next week. So, but we've seen Axis pull it back in this kind of spot. So
we've
seen them do it once before. We can see them again. Good luck versus the Hawks and V3 Axis moving forward. Rascal Jester were our team also currently now sitting in 7th place on a 1-5. They did beat Axis, as we already alluded to, and, well, they then promptly lost to Crest Gaming Act. And
Yes.
it was an interesting game because there definitely was some limit testing and dick comparing against, because giving Pink, the Rascal Jester mid laner, his Katarina and then promptly beating him was definitely a statement that Aria wanted to make.
Yeah. Like, particularly in that game, because like as much as like we talked about the Axis game versus Rascal Jester already. That's not actually the one I'm interested in. Of course, it's the CGA game because it's just watching CGA play anyone is just a bit of a coin flip as to how the early fights are going to go. And like Rascal Jester actually pulled off a really good bot lane fight earlier into the game.
They played it early well,
and they fought all the way throughout that game. The problem is, well, on the very last podcast episode, we brought up the point that Rascal Jester kind of felt like the outplay team besides CGA, but just to a lower level. And then we kind of theorized that, well, if you're going to pin yourself as the outplay team and just try and take these crazy fights, you're basically going to have a 0-2 head-to-head Rackle versus CGA because they'll outplay you yourself. They're very, very good. And you're not going to take the wins which CGA might do versus some other good teams. And they kind of got their asses handed to them after a couple of close fights and kind of, deserved loss.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with everything you said there. Rascal Jester, they got a game over the Axis, but their game versus Crest Gaming Act, yeah, sure, it wasn't clean, but their game against Axis was just as dirty, really. If anything, it was dirtier against Axis, and CGA were like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, you get a few early things, and then they just were like, no, slapped them to the side and just destroyed them, and that's something that Axis could have also done. There are worlds where that happened, and Rascal Jester are our bottom team, which means, if anything, I've got more questions for Rascal Jester than Axis.
Yeah, but I will say I have been largely impressed with Art, Hatchemetra, and Cog, at least in terms of how experience is helping them with the kind of creative problem solving. When you're saying, okay, we are behind, Pink's fallen behind, it's all going wrong, Nuggy's not helping Art in terms of getting a lead in bot lane. What do we do to try and finagle our way back into these games? And they've done that pretty well. Like, they had a great start versus CGA with, getting Art ahead despite an attempted 4-man dive. We saw, but also versus, of course, Axis, when like they were going a long way behind in mid. Pink is in a nightmare situation, but Art comes out of that game 6-0-9 with a hard carry on that Ezreal, looking really, really good. Like, that kind of veteranship and grit to win games despite being in a difficult position with two subs who aren't at the level of the rest of the league.
That's true.
And when you are coming out to early deficits, kind of out of laning phase because of that, that's really good news. You can sort of potentially win games just from clever decision making and smart plays on people like Art who can carry you games.
The things are like, you look at what Rascal Jester resorted to in Playoffs versus CGA, it still kind of went towards the style we're kind of seeing right now, right? In just terms of like, let's just try and fight. let's fight, let's outplay. Let's try and, again, Sam's word for it's finagle a way into a winning scenario. And Art is playing pretty well, and that's something to go around. But you don't have that secondary, you don't have that like crazy initiator like Ninja who would just randomly flash forward on the
or Vivid.
Or Vivid, right? And losing those two for the style you're playing, I get why they're still trying to retain this identity, because if they have to shove Ninja and Vivid back in, it means that the cogs start turning a bit better, and the cogs start turning a bit better. But I don't know if this is going to hurt them in the short term, because, well, I mean, it probably has, because they're 1-5.
It will have, yeah.
I just don't know what happens, like, can they retain the form they had from playoffs when they switch the other two in? Is that going to be enough to shuffle them into playoffs? I'm not sure. So worries for Rascal Jester even with that win.
Yeah, their wins definitely didn't come clean, and their loss also doesn't come clean for good and for bad. Good luck to Rascal Jester next week. They'll be facing off against the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks, as well as V3, so the same two as Axis. So will be interesting as a benchmark for next week's podcast to see how these two teams do against a team around the same level as them, and a team that is, well, destroying the league, as we can put at the moment, without too much spoilers. Next team we're going to cover is going to be Burning Core. They had a pretty rough week this week. They went 0-2, losing to both the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming as well as Detonation Focus Me. And gentlemen, these games didn't light me on fire, if anything, really.
No, well, the first one in particular didn't, right? No. Burning Core versus the Hawks was an interesting game to watch. Let's put it that way. Specifically in that they drafted themselves into a team comp that didn't really suit their players, nor was it fantastic into the enemy team.
Yep.
They put their soul carry, or they had a soul carry comp where it was Yuhi on Ashe who was asked to carry. We don't think Yuhi's that great a player. He entered this game 0, 6, and 5 on Ashe, spent most of the team fights dying or not putting out DPS. And they had once on Lee Sin, which is nice, and Rayfarki on Maokai, which is whatever. Like, good initiators, great, but they could not outdo the damage of Honey and Pooh on the other side, and Dasher on this Galio was just everywhere, and it was just a bit sad to watch. And Proud on the Blitzcrank couldn't hook anybody, right? Like, he was trying to find a hook target, and it was like, well, I hook a Galio, I've got a Taunt in my team. I hook a Wukong, I've got a Cyclone in my team. I hook anybody else, and a Galio turns up on top of me, and a Wukong Cyclones as well. And it was a bad draft with bad players playing the comp.
Go straight to the Death Chamber. Do not pass go or do not collect.
Yes. I don't even know if you're allowed to go to the Death Chamber. That means you at least get to go somewhere. This was just really... I mean, what was really disappointing was their draft and how... because I was on production for this game. Me watching this draft, I almost just didn't even want to type anything in the production notes after I saw the draft because I just saw how this game was going to go, and it was like, well, Proud can't do anything, and Proud is one of their best players. Yu-Gi-Oh should just play Blitz mid for fuck's sake and play him AP Blitz mid. Put Proud on set, and you might actually have a better game. You genuinely might have a better game. I'm not saying it's good, and it's awful that they fit the Blitz track. There were so many problems for me.
So, like, you say that because Proud's actually been a very good set player. Look, Yu-Gi-Oh this week was nothing special, but at least he wasn't dog shit.
Sure.
Like, he was okay. He was firmly like a 5 out of 10. 5, 6 out of 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like he fills a void. He's not going to be Rocky, but even then Rocky had some bad games last split, so I'm not going to put stuff towards that. If you look at the Hawks, in first round bans, they banned away once as carry junglers. They banned away Graves, Echo, and Kindred. And that's already kind of showing that the Hawks know exactly who the threat is, and if once isn't on a carry jungler, what does he do?
And I was hoping first pick the Aphelios to say that to Yuki, you're not having that.
Yeah, no. So I mean, I think we said this in the pregame as well. We've known this for a while. If Yuki doesn't have Aphelios, he really has a struggle. He struggles to impact the game in lane and team fights everywhere else. And we're starting to see the same with once needs to carry his weight. He needs the picks to have crazy games, and in fairness, we're being really down on them right now. Burning Core versus DFM was not
a good game.
Burning Core. No. Well, not from the entirety of Burning Core. The bot lane looked really shaky.
Well,
Yuki got first pick Varus, and
that's the player I feel like I'd identify more.
Okay, no, Proud was fine.
Yeah. Proud was fine. And again, it was a Pantheon support game where he was turning up and setting up some globals for Burning Core, which was nice.
Very similar to how Corporal played, but better technically, I guess, because he actually got more picks.
It worked out better.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
the team followed up more, so...
they used the Pantheon ult to dive Ebby and the top lane. Rayfarki was on Jace. He did fine there.
That's right.
Great escapes. 2 great escapes out of him, remember, where he was just like running all over the map and using the phase rush on Jace to get out of fights he should never get out of.
We saw Rayfarki and Ebby have some really cool 1v1s where both would live, both of them would trade super heavy, and it's still kind of solidifying our narrative that Rayfarki is, in lane, probably the second best. Okay, I think my new tier list is Ebby still, and then there's Nap on a certain champion, Appaman on a certain champion, and then you got Rayfarki for most of his champion pool.
Maybe Paz. Maybe Paz has been playing pretty well as well.
Yeah, but I'd have to give Rayfarki just the blanket second place because you can give him almost everything and he'll be good. Now we've seen him also play tanks and be good, which is...
the Marco's been fine. It's just the problem is, like,
the rest of his team doesn't do anything. So
if he does Marco when once isn't on a carry, then who... So if you look at their first game comp was just 0 damage, because Yuhi went, like, tabby on Ashe as well, and his mid laner is a set, and his top...
He's gone tank set as well. He went Deadman's play.
Tank set. You don't go Triforce, you don't go Black Cleaver, and your jungle's a Lee Sin as well. So your only damage is Ashe, and that don't work. And it didn't work. So Burning Core to address. So I think they've been figured out a bit. So they need to find another avenue of attacks. They have multiple options, get some variety in their team comps. That's what we need to see from them if they do want to make it. But to be honest, I think they're at risk of not making playoffs if they keep it like this, particularly if they've been solved and the other teams, which are lower in the standing, start figuring them out. So Burning Core worries for them, but at least they've got something to play around. The DFM game was pretty fun.
It was fun, and like they were at least competing, and like that gave me some hope. But actually, there were some smart plays from in that game. They were trading really well, but great dive bot side. But we'll go get the Rift Herald top. Okay, we're gonna use our globals to go top now and try and change that around. And that was some good stuff in the mid game. And Once had a great game. Dre Farkey had a great game. Yu-Gi-Oh's Galio was all right, but he just drags the level of the team down because the kind of discrepancy, if nothing else but gold, between Yuhi and Utapon in that DFM game. Go back and watch the gold discrepancy. Everyone else has got a decent lead maybe for Burning Core. That's because DFM have indexed it to giving Utapon everything, and Yuhi is down 3,000 gold.
Individually.
Down 3,000 gold individually at like 10 to 15 minutes in the game. On a Varus. Like, that should not happen.
Yuhi's got serious concerns now because he's can only play Aphelios and can't even play the most powerful cat champion in the current game, and he's just getting picked apart at minute 5, which is worrying, which is genuinely worrying. But then something off.
He's also an import. He's Korean. He's an import.
Yeah, which is absurd. Which is crazy. But good luck to Burning Core next week. Hopefully, you might be able to pick up a win. And if you pick up a win next week against either Crest Gaming Act or Sengoku, you're definitely going to we'll give a good push back onto our thoughts from this week. But we'd like to see it first, and we're happy to throw down the gauntlet first, and then for you to answer us.
We call it like we see it, but good luck.
Our next team is going to be the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming, who went 1-1 this week. They beat Burning Core in the game that we've already started to really cover, and then they had a loss to V3 Esports in a kind of a dirty way, but there was one player with a bit of hope on the team, and maybe there is something that the Hawks are starting to change how they're playing for moving forward. Obviously, I'm a bit biased on my personal opinion of the Hawks. I still have at least some bias towards the Hawks, but I also call it like it is, and if they look like garbage like they did last split, I'm going to tell them they're garbage.
Like, we'll say they were kind of gifted a victory versus Burning Core. If only because of the drafting things we've just been over.
But they identified what they needed to do, at least, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that was good. And Aramik got left alone in the top side, which was nice. He wasn't put under pressure, because the moment you put that guy under pressure, like V3
crumbles.
kind of did. At some points, getting caught out near his bot tier 2. Like,
that was gorgeous to watch, because he was just walking into his lane like he thought it was solo queue, and then it's just like, and bam! V3 here! No!
Yeah.
And then...
Yeah, doesn't play weak side very well, is what we found out. And dies in a 1v1 to Paz, trying to go in and messing the 1v1. I know Nymaera had some thoughts on that, but I think before he wants to do that, we will say that the 200-acre bot lane was pretty good this week. Did pick up the Aphelios, did Honey, and had a great game versus Burning Core. Won a pretty clutch team fight versus V3 that kind of raised a few eyebrows. So, well, maybe they've got a chance. Didn't really work out because the rest of his team kind of died the next fight, but, some signs of life from that bot lane from Hawks.
Boogie slapped him back down into his place, and he was just like, no!
I still think they won't make playoffs, personally, if only because they are so exploitable in the top side. But, bit of hope out of the bot lane, bit of hope out of the mid.
You think that the Hawks won't make playoffs over...
I'm writing a note down. I'm going to bring this up as a topic towards the end. We'll talk about this later. I'm writing something down about this, okay?
Okay, no, that's that. Yeah, we don't want to delve into that right now. We got other stuff got to cover. But yeah, I mean, I think that Dasher has looked pretty good again. I'm pretty happy with his performance. I think that even against V3, he had some decent team fights. His score of line is not flattering, 0-3-2. But the Vladimir did some work in the team fights, almost ended up setting up really well for Honey. Honey had a good week. And we've had a lot of comments about this guy, particularly about his misfortune being very ineffective in spring. But the team was defective. So how much can you really pin that on him? Bits and pieces. We've talked about his positioning. We've talked about his laning phase as well. His Aphelios looked good this week, so at least they have something to play around there, much like Burning Core has something to play around with Once and Rayfarki on their specified champions. I think Pooh's Thresh personally impressed me quite a bit too. I think his Lanterns were really good in keeping people safe. He disengaged from a lot of big plays, even versus V3.
He did.
So I was pretty happy with Pooh's Thresh performance as well. And then, of course, Tussle is just Mr. Consistent for that team. So, I mean, there's some good stuff.
Yeah, in all fairness, I think the Hawks are slowly starting to figure out how they need to play as a unit.
Mhm.
It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
It's not ideal, but slowly they are starting to figure it out. There is definitely a weak side problem in Aromik, as
Yes.
the more we see games, the more we wish Dash was back in the top lane, personally, which is a crazy thing to say because the amount of disrespect that you two gave to him in my eyes. I know we're just fine. I know we don't care.
Yeah.
But in all fairness, Dasher didn't really play weak side as well. No, actually, he played weak
No,
side
he didn't
just
play
as
weak
bad.
side a top laner either.
No,
really,
no.
he just loves to be the point of pressure, and that's fine. If he ends up setting that up, it's all right. It's just having
Well,
the
you need to
patience
play
to
around
get
it.
to the point in the game where he can be on the strong side of the map. Playing stuff like Corki, getting to 2-3 items with the package, Aurelia getting to your first item, and then starting to 1v1 people. Like, we just need to see the team set him up for that, and himself not jump the gun on it. And in fairness, he's been doing pretty well recently, so I'm not going to begrudge him too much.
And beating Burning Core this week is a very good place to be because
Yeah, it's a nice pickup.
Because if you've beaten Burning Core and also you're looking pretty decent against the lower other level teams, obviously, this actually kind of sets you up to be in a good place, relatively speaking. Because
I agree.
if you can basically already beat the Jesters, you've also already beat Burning Core, it means next week when you're going to play against Axis, you can kind of go in thinking, guys, I think we've got a good chance in this one.
Yep.
At least they might be kings of the bottom, which gets you off playoffs. Which,
Yeah.
which might be all they care about at the moment. Which, because if you make playoffs, then there's a run. There's a chance. You are one of 6 that can make worlds.
And a best of 5 is a completely different beast to best of 1, and we know that, and that's why Axis fell down to V3 in the first round. We thought that might be closer than it was, whereas if they'd faced a different opponent, maybe that would have worked out so well. Being on the lower end of the bracket means that you potentially end up facing a very dangerous team, the 3rd seed that comes in, maybe even 4th, fourth if you're lucky. So I don't think. I still don't see them going far, but it's still playoffs. There's a chance, and if there's a chance, well, there's a will, there's a way. And we know that they have some formulas for success. It's just pulling them out consistently in a best of 5.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Good luck to the Hawks next week, who are going to be facing against Rascal Jester and Axis. So,
big one for them. They need to win those.
Pretty comfy week. Yeah, if they don't 2-0, questions are going to be brought up. But then we'll also have to look at the games and the drafts, because like we said against Burning Core almost gave them that win in the pick and ban phase. Yep. So much to play for moving forward. Gentlemen, our next team we're going to be covering is one of our top teams. And now this is where we have this interesting disparity between our higher tier teams and our lower tier teams. And Sengoku Gaming is the first one, and it's weird to put them in 4th place out of their the other teams, but they're the current team that only has a loss, and they're on a loss streak. Everybody else is on a win streak. So, weird one. Sengoku lost to, beat Axis, but then lost to Crest Gaming Act in a nail-biter of a game. So much happened. That game was absurdly unreal how much happened in it. And I don't think we need to talk too much about the Axis game, because that was Sengoku giving a statement to the lower level teams of, no, you're not on our level. We will destroy you. And
I think of the teams I have the most confidence in dispatching lower tier teams, it's probably Sengoku, actually.
Interesting.
In terms of the top,
it's their style. Yeah,
it's their style. They are so consistent in laning phase, and they come out with at least 2 or 3 options to win a game. So against Axis, they bring out Twisted Fate Empyrean, and they have Yutori on this secondary, have him on the carry of Ezreal, and then top lane is playing Camille. And Sengoku, the big thing for this week, they played 2 games of Camille. And I think this is particularly good in the LJL for a number of reasons, because there's a host of teams which love brawling, and I particularly that's CGA and Rascal Jester, those 2. But it can be you can kind of say that of a number of other teams too. Maybe Burning Core in that group as well. So if you have Camille as this ability to somewhat team fight, somewhat split the map, if you set the Camille ahead, she has the ability to win on both sides of that kind of coin and say, okay, we can split push if we don't want to take the objective fight, or we can go for it. Then it means it sets you up for success against these teams, which are just always going to take the fight. So I love that idea going against CGA, but the game just got completely out of hand towards the late game. Just so out of hand. And CGA just did something which only they can do in the LJL. So we'll talk about them in a bit, but yeah.
I mean, that gold graph just went from one side to the other side to one side to the other side to way in favor of Sengoku Gaming, where they had 2 inhibitors they were shoving in to try and end the game. They just taken too long. Yuto actually had a really bad game, actually. He ended up 3-7-4 in that week. And like, there were a couple of times where he was caught being really greedy on his recalls in particular, where he takes an inhibitor, is too slow to get out of the base, gets caught on the back end of it as Arya comes diving out with a package. Nap throws a Call of the Forge God. He dies, and CGA get a Baron. Doesn't mean they can do anything with the Baron, but they buy themselves 5 minutes, and that gets Gango on Aphelios to 4 items. Nap hits the mother of all Call of the Forge God 3 fights in a row. Yeah, Gango gets to run over with those items, and Sengoku can't fight anymore.
In all fairness to Yutori in that game, he dealt the 3rd most damage across all players in the game, only 2nd on his team to Pyrion, dealing 26k worth of damage. And Pyrion dealt 30k, but there was only one person who destroyed him, and that's because Mr. 200 is in this game for some reason.
The thing is, though, like, wait, that's okay saying that in isolation, but then you say here did the 2nd most damage on his team as an Ezreal. That's where I start raising eyebrows, and I'm like, when you're Galio, so is the Galio out damage the Ezreal? I'm like, Galio is not a hyper carry, and this game went long. This game went really long.
But then he also out DPS Corki on the enemy team.
Yeah,
that's a big thing.
Who was on Arya, who rarely ever gets out damaged by anybody, and that was 3 people in this game alone out damaged him. So
yeah, no, and there's something to say about that. But for me, also, it just Ezreal. I'm just so used to him. Like, even in losing games, Ezreal should be ridiculously high on the damage graph. To be outdamaged by a Galio, I mean, that says something to Pyrion as well. Pyrion has some really good team fights on the Galio, and this is another thing, right? This is Sengoku kind of bring it back onto their perspective. I did like what they tried to do with their compositions this week, where they had a global in the mid lane or a semi-global. Well, yeah, so you either had the TF or you had the Galio, and then you had the Camille. And it gives you the ability to either go to the Camille or go with the Camille to the fight. It gives them options, and I would like to see them continue on this style. They do need to clean up their execution in team fights, though, and just smooth out those rough edges so they're not caught out in rotation. And maybe CGA are the only team which could punish Sengoku in this style, actually, because they randomly go for fights which no one else would do, and they're not even good fights. They fight over anything, and it's just like, so we'll talk about it in regards to another team as well coming up, but like sometimes just forcing people to burn cooldowns for an opportunistic place, like, oh man, they're fighting over nothing, we can win this fight, and then it sets them up not to win the next fight. That can just be worthy in its own right.
Yeah, and like, I mean, there was credit to the team code, because basically Arya could not play the team fights all that well. When basically Appleman goes, right, I'm going to flash hook shot on top of you, Galio's going to come down on top of you, and you just don't get to play the game. Great, 180 carries down, but when you're running 2 threats and like they can't get to the Aphelios, like you still lose the fight, because the wombo combo doesn't kill everyone. It only kills the one, and that was problematic as well.
There were a bunch of problems, and I mean, part of it was that Ezreal, part of it was also that NT was on a Yuumi, and that Yuumi is able to buff the team, but also cannot engage for the team. It was kind of all on Appamen or Blank to find the spots to do that, and they didn't come through, and CGA were able to extend this game far longer than Sengoku should have allowed it, and by proxy, were able to win the game, and good job to them, frankly.
Yeah.
Let me just say, I'm gonna have to VOD review that game because so much random shit happened. I could come back in 2 days' time and go, wow, guys, did you realize this happened? And it would change my view of this game. So much random stuff happened. I'm not even sure what to pull out my conclusions from this. Like, it's just all over the place.
Yeah.
Nap is a god. Like, the man hit 3 team fights perfectly in a row.
Let's not talk about Nap too much, because this is Sengoku. Sengoku will be facing off against Burning Core, as well as a rematch versus Detonation Focus Me. So definitely an exciting one coming along there. But till we get there, good luck to Sengoku next week. Now, gentlemen, our next team on the table is Detonation Focus Me, whom didn't have the cleanest week. In all fairness to them, they have definitely been shown that there is weakness in their lineup. And, well, when asked the question, are you still the best? Even Burning Core were able to at least make it competitive for the first 15 minutes. So, I've got more questions, I think, for Detonation Focus Me than I have for Burning Core, which is a weird one.
I think that's our level of expectation. I don't think it. Yeah, that's not saying for me like Burning Core's better than DFM. I just think that
I'm with you on that.
So many questions about them because after finals we expected them to be blowing away the league, and they are certainly not.
Yeah, I mean, just look at my tier list. I put Burning Core in last place, but I put DFM in first place.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I will say this was a better week for me for DFM this week. They looked significantly better than they did last week. Yeah, the game versus V3 was actually a really close game and a really good game where they came up to 6,000 gold, and then there was this one clutch team fight for V3 which spun it all around. And credit to V3 for doing that, and DFM but kind of making up taking that bad team fight, but they got way ahead in the early game. It looked so much crisper, so much cleaner.
I think I would agree with Sam.
Interesting.
And versus Burning Core as well, actually, I think DFM played that game pretty well. Yeah. Actually, that was more Burning Core stepping up, and particularly once and Rayfaki stepping up to counter plays. That was really good. But, Utapon smashed that game, and that was a big difference. But Steel had a great early game as well.
So the two things are, I think that Utapon and Steel had a really good week. Even in their loss versus V3, they looked very formidable. And if you look back to last week, they played against Rascal Jester and Axes, our two last place teams, and they somewhat fumbled those games. I know that. So I went back and watched DFM versus Axes in that game, and they were very lucky to win their top lane 2v2, which set them up for success. You can't really do that versus a top team. What happens if you just kind of roll the dice versus, for instance, CGA? They did that versus Sengoku and came out with one in the late game. You can't really use this as a formula for victory, so I'm not confident in giving them my benefit of the doubt. This week it was less so in that kind of rolling the dice kind of style of play, particularly versus Burning Core. I really loved how Steel played on the Trundle. He was everywhere. He was countering a lot of stuff. And there's one particular moment, Once has just bought a Medjai's and DFM punished him so hard on one overstep. He jumps forward with an E looking for something. He gets Trundle pulled out. Immediately has to ult. As soon as he's used the ult, the TFL comes in and gold cards them up. They remove the Medjai stacks, and then they start taking down the rest of Burning Core. I'm in that one play, I'm actually, that's the lethal mentality I need from DFM, because they know that the victory is kind of there for the taking. They go in all the way, and a lot of that is Utapon being on the Ezreal that game and just absolutely just kicking people's shit in. He finished 11-0-7. The guy had a really good game.
I just have huge problems that they can get a 6k lead and then lose the game. That
was
that's
stupid.
Huge to me. And they're losing a game like that, and the idea that Burning Core are even competitive when they're only really relying on 2 to 3 members against DFM, who may I add, were destroying everybody in Spring Split, regardless of who it was. They didn't care who it was. They had just domination. This doesn't feel like domination, and I'm kind of disappointed with DFM, frankly. I would expect them to play the game far more smarter, and they just don't seem to be rotating, especially as I'm seeing the two teams above them, I think, are playing better.
I'd agree with that. No, I'll let Sam let you go.
Yeah, so I think I partly agree. I will disagree with you on the Burning Core game, because I actually think Burning Core stepped up and they had a better draft. So I won't give that. I think that one's a bit of an overstatement.
DFM need to draft better.
Well, I actually think DFM drafted pretty well. I liked their draft there.
I don't think their bans all were good. I don't think a lot of their bans were very good.
It made a lot of sense to me. Sorry. The one versus V3, on the other hand, though, I think my big issue with that one was they got the 6k ahead, but Ebby has had 2 or 3 games of Wukong now, and in all of them, he has not team fought well on that champion, which is insane considering it's potentially the single biggest top lane team fight carry in the world right now. Look at the LPL, look at LEC. Licorice has been talking about it as well when he had an interview when he first picked it in NA. Ebby's Wukong has not found Cyclones very well, and versus V3, they tried to go for fights, which is fine when you're that far ahead, and every time Ebby got stifled on that Wukong. And that's a problem for me. That's a big one.
I think the Wukong thing
is like a god, by the way. Part of that was just Reyna.
Yeah, Ryan is really.
Ryan had a great hook.
Ryan was just so good.
I mean, so the thing for me about particularly the game against V3, if you go and look at the match history, you can see this huge gold swing, and DFM take 2 bad fights in a row. So the first fight is Ebby getting caught out and DFM trying to bail him out, and they use so many cooldowns in saving Ebby that they have nothing left for the team fight, even with how big is the gold lead at this point? 6,000. It's a 6,000 gold lead.
And then the next one's where they try and protect Gang, right?
And the next one, you cut into it from a replay, and they are fighting again without any of those cooldowns still, because they've used all their globals. And the big thing for me is that, I was talking about how Sengoku, I liked how they did this kind of semi-global way of kind of either choosing to split the map or converge on one point very, very quickly. that only works when you're making numbers advantages and stuff, right? Because if you're just going for the 5v5 versus a fucking Aphelios, he is going to kick your head in. And that's exactly what happened.
Assuming he's left alone, which he
was.
was.
I mean, like, because at that point, the Utapon was pretty fed on the Ashe and was looking pretty strong. But Reiner lands the clutchest hook I have seen in a team fight in a very long time, where he stops the DPS from the Hurricane Ashe, like, dead in that fight. And it means that Aphelios is unanswered. And also, Ebby's Wukong went for Archer and failed. Did not get there, got flayed out of it, I think.
Also, Paz was willing to always die for his team, and he routinely would get like 4 or 5 men killed, especially in those big team fights, and Paz would be the only one that died, and Paz was like, it doesn't matter, we just aced them, Archer's gonna carry the game, and literally did, which was very, very, very impressive.
Archer and Reiner put the game on the back, and in fairness, Boogie had a decent game. So
decent late game. His early game was poor.
We'll talk about them more because we're kind of focusing on DFM for this bit. We'll talk about that bit more in general. But like, I was impressed by Yusupon. I think that he had a really good week. I think that Steel also had a good week, but I think that's kind of where the good news ends. Because Gang was put on Tom Kench for 2 games, and there's only so much you can do with that champion in terms of playmaking. You can protect your Ashe, that's fine. It makes Yusupon look better. Steel used his Panty in the first game pretty well. I like how DFM have used their globals in general. The problem is I can kind of see the ceiling of it if they're playing like this at this level, because V3 punched them so hard. They knew how to not split themselves up and not be vulnerable to DFM at a certain point in the game where they could fight. As soon as they had the items available to fight, DFM started losing. Yep. And that's a big thing, right? Because DFM had the options and the map state to not fight. They choose to fought, they got out fought, they lost so many objectives, and it snowballed into a win.
It's also
and
fine
that's not
to just...
something I've seen from DFM for a while.
It's also fine. For some reason, they didn't... It's the difference between sometimes you know when you should just let your teammate die. Like, and they didn't do it. There is the C9 mentality where you always fight for your teammate and will always go back and do it. The difference is...
You need the right comp for it.
You do, exactly. I totally agree. And that didn't always work out, and hopefully moving forward for DFM, it'll be something that they can fix those minor things and be back on form, be back on the top as they would like to be.
I'll say I think these are easier flaws to fix than it is if the early game's wrong, because they crushed the early game and they were playing around the map. You know, top side of the map was 2-0-2 across the board.
We will have to. I think, sir, can we go on to our next team, please?
It's an easier point to fix. Yeah, I think those are easier to fix.
I also agree to disagree as well. So we could go around in circles for days, sir. So let us continue. Good luck to DFM in their following games next week. That's going to be Crest Gaming Act as well as Sengoku. So definitely that's
hard schedule.
Banger games. Well, good for us.
The thing is, like, the good thing is, I mean, just kind of finishing off this, at least if they're going to do something against, they need higher tier opposition to kind of prove to us that they're doing something good in terms of their preparation. Show us.
Yeah, show us
the time.
Indeed, and they get to do it immediately next week. Gentlemen, moving over to our second place team. That's right. Sengoku and DFM aren't tied with this team. Crest Gaming Act, currently 5-1 on a 3-win streak, had a pretty good week. In all fairness to them, they had a pretty good week. They beat the Jesters, and then they had that nail-biter of a game versus Sengoku where they were behind, but found a way back. The week of the comebacks, in my eyes.
They've probably forced a great number of people to have heart replacement surgeries.
Probably,
sure.
Yeah. Probably, yeah, 100%.
Where do we start with CGA? Where do we start?
I mean, I would like to start with Nap, if I may. Start in that top lane.
Because
Nap is playing night and day different between how he played in spring to how he's playing in summer. This feels like playoff Nap. Like when they had the tiebreaker match, moving forward, it's like the man never stopped playing at that level, and it's only finding ways to go higher. His Ornn is just so aggressive, can 1v1 anybody and will try and take it. Was trying to 1v1 Apperman for some reason, and then his Wukong is just what Ebby wishes his was, because it's so good.
Yeah, I think all of us are in agreement that Nap has the best Wukong in the LJL.
By far. Yeah.
And so this reminded me, so remember back in spring when we were talking about, Ebby's got the best set in the LJL, you know, Ebby's set is huge, and it's still really, really good. Yeah. And a lot of Ebby's value in spring came from the fact that basically no one could stand up to him on that champion. I'm wondering if this is the same for Nap and Wukong. And this is a really big shift in power, because I was saying, kind of coming into the pre-season predictions, I couldn't really bet against DFM because I didn't want to bet against Ebby, because this guy's just always won the LJL. He was on Rampage, he's been on DFM when they've been winning. Now I'm like, hey, there is a pick, much like, things are like, as much as Apperman's Aatrox is really good, don't get me wrong, Wukong is like not just Nap's best champion right now, and he is the best at that champion. Wukong is the best top lane champion right now. It's a perfect storm
100%.
of everything, and he's performing out of his goddamn mind.
He's playing so amazing across the whole map. Go ahead, Initia1ise. Go ahead.
I'm just having a look at, as a bit of an example, having a look at DFM's OP.GG for Ebby here.
What?
And
We're
like
talking- oh,
his
okay.
win rate on Aatrox is 60%, 59 on set, it's 64 on Ornn, 55 on Gangplank. Great win rates, and then Wukong's down at 50% with a 2.2 KDA. Like, I know there's a learning curve here, but like, it's clear he's not quite got the grasp on the Wukong he wants as yet.
Let's start talking about the games that Chris Gaming Act had against both Rascal Jester and Sengoku. As we started talking a bit about Nap, and I think Nap is a good way to kind of explain and go around, because CGA are definitely relying heavily on Nap more than ever.
And that's not something we said about CGA before. In fact, that's probably the opposite of what we said. Nap has always been the role player. He's been the utility guy. He's been the guy towing the line, but it's always been Gango and, more importantly, Ardia, who's really just picked up the slack. And don't get me wrong, Ardia and Gango have really fucking good weeks too, don't get me wrong. But Nap was the guy that kind of tipped them over the edge in two scrappy games. Yes. And, you know, if we compare them to, like, DFM, and we'll talk about V3 in a bit as well, but Sengoku too, right? These guys are always trying to have their eyes on the map state. They have very clear win conditions. They're trying to play around them. Honestly, I don't know what the heck CGA are doing, but they're fighting and they're winning, and they use that just to confuse other teams, get them off their rocker, and just win games anyway. They just win the team fights. That's all that matters to them.
And like mechanically, they've inspired us. They have. Decision-making wise, they have not. Against the Jesters, they made some poor plays early that got them punished with a 4-man dive that was very heavily counted. They kind of tried to do what V3 did to them the week before, and instead they got slapped around a bit and gave Pink 3 assists and Art 2 kills. Like, that is a bad space to be. Against Sengoku, they were like picking all these crazy fights, and sometimes they were going well, sometimes they weren't, and like their answer to everything is fight, whether it's good or not. And I know like Nymaera's talked a little bit, say, about that DFM dive in the top side against Axis, which is like, well, should they have really taken that dive at this point? CJ seemed to be doing similar things throughout the game, where they just go, we'll take the fight. They don't seem to question whether it's a good idea or not, and that's fine when you can mechanically outplay, and people like Gango and Arya are doing wonders, and Nap's team fighting like a god on Ornn. But it does leave us with questions.
I do have a caveat to that, because things are like with some of the other teams, I'd say that they're taking fights which are actually losing fights. Like, you're taking a low percentage play, but for a good reason. It's like, oh, if we win this fight, then we get everything. CGA, they're kind of mechanicking their way to high percentage fights where they know they can outplay the enemy team, but it's not really for a reason. It's kind of the opposite kind of way around. They know they'll win the fight, they just don't know what they'll get from it. Whereas other teams know what they'll get for it if they just win the fight. So CGA are kind of disrupting the flow of a game where teams are getting ready to reset for certain things, and then just suddenly a fight happens and it changes what their plans for the next 5 minutes are. And that worked really well against Rascal Jester, because they were playing as Pink's Katarina, who does love to brawl in its own ways, but like CJ managed to get to their points of power very, very quickly in that game and just brawled their way to a win before Art was on 2 items on the Ezreal and stuff like that. That's a very important part.
I mean, Gango got to play an AP and Arya played an AD mid. Arya played Kalista mid. And then they put Gango on Cassiopeia. Gango looked good on Cassiopeia, may I add. Arya went 8-1 and 13. Like, this game, once they hit that, what is it? Let me have a look quickly on the graph. Once it hit minute 16, they were in full control of the game. And it only, well, arguably you could say it happened around minute 15, minute 14 that they started really getting control. And the game just went all things CGA, sure, yeah. Rascal Jester taking the first 10 minutes of the game. That's not surprising against CGA. A lot of teams take the early advantage over CGA in the Gold League. But that means fuck all. It really ever means anything unless it's V3, who can actually take that early game and translate that into a late game. We saw it to the most extreme level, and I love to use this, because the next game they played against Sengoku, they literally lost 2 inhibitors and then find the way to come back. That's how strong mechanically they're playing, but also, you can't just be strong mechanics and win that. You have to be doing rotations well, farming well, finding when to get a pick and to go for it and when not to, because that's a big one.
My issue is, like, if CGA want to be looking to be, their second place in the league right now, then that's off good mechanical play. But if they actually want to push for that kind of position, hell, first in the LJL come the end of playoffs, win the split, they have to stop relying on clutch team fights. Like, if your way to win is we can only clutch team fights, that is not a high percentage way to win a game. Or like KT Arrows managed to flip their way to a victory, but this like way back when. But I don't think this gets them far in playoffs.
So this reminds me of
anyway.
This reminds me of 2018 IG in a lot of ways, where as opposed to kind of like the last 2 years of LPL teams, where they've kind of refined that style, and they're starting to, I was saying about how CGA, they know they won the fight, but they don't know what they'll get from it. LPL's now moved on to both. They know they can win the fight, and they know what they can get from it, and they're still aggressive with it. I think that the flexibility which Crest are starting to show now is really important. Aria, once again, adding you
The
Callista's really, so Chovy had played that versus SKT in playoffs. They lost that game, but he was crushing lane. You can see what it does. Having Gango with the ability to pick out something AP in the bot lane is also really cool as well, because if you look at the draft against Rascal Jester is really cool, because you look at what Gango does with his champion. Cass has sustain during the laning phase, and it's really hard to wall him because of the miasma. So Ezreal jumps forward and just dies, because if you get a hook with Nautilus onto that W from the Cassiopeia, it's really annoying. I also want to say Grendel had a really good week.
He
just
did
have aside for that, I'll go into that a little bit later. But Gango also against the Katarina, like, grounded her in several key team fights where you just put the W down, she can't jump anymore, she can't flash anymore, and that means that Pink can't have those pop-off moments. It means that the Ren stacks have much more time to come in, so Arya gets like another 2-3 auto attacks, gets the kills, gets the resets, all that kind of shit. And then also having this ability in the team fights for like all the CC to pull into each other has been so huge, because Grendel, for the first time in a while, looked like he was on the same page as the rest of the team, and team fought like an absolute motherfucker. That guy was great.
Yeah. Well, everyone just flashes after him. That's the other way to deal with Grendel going in by himself. It's like, well, we just all do the same thing. If we all do the wrong thing at the right time, it becomes the right thing, it turns out.
Yeah. And I think that really throws off the teams which want to control the game. And that kind of showed against Sangoku. Because, again, like in that game,
against
random fights turned it around.
I mean, in all fairness, it's going to be exciting to see how much more CGA have to offer, and we'll be able to find out their limits next week, as I think the team that will have the best shot against this kind of crazy all-in idea that CGA have been doing is Detonation Focus Me, and we're yet to see them face off, but
that's true.
We'll get to see it next week. If they beat DFM, that's going to be a very interesting conversation on the podcast. Is all I can say.
It will be, sure.
And potentially they'll be able to go into this into that match with a 4-win streak, as their first match of the day will be against Burning Core, who they beat previously, obviously, to being at 5-1 and only losing to V3. So, a lot of expectations for them moving forward. I'm just thinking we've been on this CJ for 10 minutes, so
there's a lot to talk about, but move on.
Like to move over to our last team, and still undefeated, gentlemen. V3 Esports. Every member of this team is just always turning up, turning on, playing different champs, always looking good. They beat the Hawks in a pretty decisive fashion, and then they came against DFM and found the way back in and won the game. There's just a lot to unpack from this team, really.
I think that Ace is no longer a liability. The guy's playing fine.
Yeah, he is.
Is he going to be the superstar on this team? No, because you've got people like Reiner there.
Yeah.
And Reiner is
so damn good.
Reiner is probably the one guy I would say is out and out best in role right now. I don't think anyone else has claim to their role 100%. Reiner, I think, does. I think that his thresh has been absolutely absurd, and his set team fights have been very high damage for support.
Oh, it's certainly high damage. He lands face breakers every single time on at least 2 people, one of them true as well, which is just absurd.
And having that alongside, so having the best support in the league versus one of the best carries in the AD carry role, as opposed to like the utility secondary carry when you've got someone like, Gango's a good carry, don't get me wrong, and he played really fucking well this week, but also sometimes he's fallen into that secondary role. Archer, when he has this support crew of Reiner and the rest of his team playing so well around him, has so much space to shine. And against DFM in particular, he was given just everything to play for, and he took down, our kings of the LJL, and he did it with style.
I think they've been exceptional generally. We've also sort of seen how they want to play the game, right? Which is they have a clear, coherent comp. They tend to play around bot side. They will have a 5 to 10 minute game plan, which they execute very, very well. The only time I think we've seen them have their game plan stifled was against DFM, where Boogie was on vision about where his pathing was and was 0-1-1 for 15 to 20 minutes of that game along with Ace, which that was the one time I went, oh, this is unusual. Ace and Boogie have not managed to get anything done on the map, and that was unexpected. And you know, they had the joys of a great team fight comp that did bring them back in on the back of clutch hook from Reiner, great team fight positioning from Archer. But I think this is the first week we have seen potentially ways to punish V3, which might be good news for the other teams in the league.
I don't quite know how much you're willing to die on what you said they only play really around bot lane, because I'd have to heavily disagree with you on
I think they play around mid 2v2 a lot.
Yeah. They do play around mid 2v2. Sorry. They do play around mid 2v2 as well. But like we've seen a lot of times where they will drag their mid 2v2 to dive bot for you know, they've done a lot of times. CJ, they did it
and they are also willing to play around Paz when he is sometimes going off on his Wukong. I'm thinking back against Sengoku where he went 7-2 and 3, and they just started playing completely around Paz and Boogie in that game. So I think
when was that?
That was last week, where they went.
Even then, but that game was a weird thing in itself because Biggie was fucking everywhere, so they technically played around.
That's what I think V3 are doing. I think they just find whoever's going to beat. Everyone tries their best. They try to play as a team, and then when one person pulls an advantage, they just go, "All right, guys, all in on this guy." But we'll put a few of the chips to the side also because we can't fully do it.
In particular, I love how quick V3 are to pull the trigger on vertical jungling. Yes. I think that's a really big thing for me. It's a huge thing for me. So they did it once again this week versus the Hawks. So they just invade into bot side. They get a really good trade at level 1 into Honey and Poo, and eventually they set up a dive, which does go like 2 for 1. 2 for 2. But then it's just like the AD carry dies, he loses a load of XP, and it's just a really awkward situation for Honey. And he does bring it back in some good team fights, don't get me wrong. But like, I love how they have that in their inventory, and they just rely. It's gonna become an issue when people start picking better level 1 champions again, and they don't have that. So if you pick stuff like Nautilus, Morgana, Braum, it's gonna be awkward because.
But then V3 just probably can adapt, because I expect them to be able to just adapt and change how they're gonna play these games. They might just start going, "All right, Paz, we're back on you again. Boogie's gonna come mid and top, and then we're just gonna forget about bot lane because guess what? We've got maybe the best support and maybe the best AD carry. They shouldn't lose a 2v2.
I think Ryan is definitely the best support.
He's doing very, very well.
Question about that. The thing which is just worrying me right now is we're judging them off of 3 weeks of games, and that's a good amount. It's no longer a small sample size; it's a medium sample size. If I go back to their match versus DFM in playoffs, and actually versus CGA in those first couple of games as well, no, particularly the CGA games actually, when they went and did the reverse sweep, the first 2 games, I seem to remember the early game jungling going pretty poor.
Went horribly wrong. The level 1's got
horribly wrong, and they didn't exactly recover well during that point. The big evolution for them right now is that they fell behind versus DFM. We talked about it from DFM's side. But for V3 to all understand as soon as Ebby is caught out and the rest of DFM's team are collapsing, they're like, hey, this is our chance. We can start doing something with this. This is really big. And they end up piling on, and largely through Paz buying so much time and Archer just carrying the backline DPS. That was huge. I do think that... So Ace managed to stay safe on LeBlanc. I'd still say potentially he's not like going the full 9 yards.
But I don't think he needs to.
He didn't need to when
he spent a long time around mid and didn't get anything for 20 minutes.
But then that was the point. He half the time didn't need to. He was just there to play around the team.
I agree with that, but kind of harping on with Sam. So when V3 were in the early deficit, a lot of it was because Boogie and Ace couldn't find anything onto Seros on the TF, because TF was playing really well.
He ganked 4 times and got nothing.
Yeah, and there was a lot of pressure put onto that mid lane, which didn't really amount to much. So half of me wonders what happens if Archer is on a lower DPS AD carry that can't scale so well, or, you know, particularly just off the Aphelios and stuff like that. Do they need to reevaluate once again what they're doing with Ace and stuff like that? Because potentially you need to put Boogie back on something like a Kindred or a Graves or something like that. And they do have those options. So I'm just wondering if there are games where they do end up in lower DPS compositions, they fall into a rut and they can't out-team fight their way out of stuff like that.
Az hasn't been forced to play his Aatrox like routinely over and over again. Like, this is why I'm so looking forward to seeing people take it to V3, because that's when V3 can start going, oh, I remember when we had this was our only way to win. We can just go back and flip the page back and go, oh yeah, I forgot we had this in our playmaking book. And that's what's going to be really exciting, because they seem to be only showing new stuff. And I
love how they've done it with different champions. That's
it does that too.
Can they do it with different kinds of champions if they start?
Yeah, that's what I want to see.
This is the stylistic thing, and it's also like for me as well. Like, this is some good news for V3. Generally, like, where in playoffs, sometimes they were losing the micro outplays. They would go the wrong way. So Archer getting knocked up on the misfortune versus Ebby's Ornn. He dies, having a great game, and then collapses the rest of the finals. Or, Boogie's level 1's not quite working out. The last few weeks, they've been winning those micro 1v1s, and against DFM, that team fight in mid lane worked in part because Reiner lands the clutch hook to stop Utapon firing for a second and a half, gets to flay him out. That's really big.
Then that's
they
DFM
stop
also throwing that. They gave it to them.
Sure. And but the thing is, there's also within the good plays from VA3, there are these great micro moments as well where you go, they are winning these things where you go, that's really good news. Another one where Seros is looking to port to the other side of the fight. Reiner lands the hook onto the TF as he's gating, so the teleport is cancelled. Those kind of things that V3 are winning, that's a good news for them too. Do you want to rely on that?
No.
but the thing is, they did win this time around is good news.
Yeah, but if I kind of put this through and say, okay, they've done this versus V3, done it versus Sengoku, done it versus CJ, there is no question this is the best team in the LJ.
Oh yeah, by far right now.
Yeah.
The question is at this point, how far ahead are they, and can the other teams catch up?
Yeah.
I think
are there avenues to punish? Yeah.
Are there avenues to punish? I think that maybe with a patch change and something, but even then, I would not put it as a high chance that V3 are going to lose random games. They're still looking really good.
Well,
I mean, they clutched their way back into that victory against DFM, so maybe if people follow that strat, maybe they've got options there.
Well, that's a lot of pressure onto V3. They've got if you want to follow what DFM did, you've got to do a lot of things to even put them in that spot, and then you've got to figure out the way to problem solve and not lose that game and not get one quick catch out and then start losing it from there. V3 are probably going to have a reasonably easy week for them, probably going up to an 8-0 win streak. I will definitely be predicting them winning, as they will be facing against the Rascal Jesters and Axis next week. But what we're interested in from our narrative point of view is going to be during Super Week. If they want to start that 9-0 and to tie DFM with their 2020 split record of 9 wins and 0 losses of a streak, DFM will get to deny them that pleasure in week 5. And Crest Gaming Out will be looking forward and licking their lips if there is a wounded V3, because you know that these are players that will want to fight. So not too much for next week, but definitely come week 5, week 6 is where we'll have some interesting games for V3 moving forward. However, those 2 wins versus Axis and Rascal Jester will be a guaranteed lock into playoffs. So that's good to know. That's good to know. One more win will lock V3 into playoffs, which is important. Quick note.
They start looking to do some other stuff, or they want to secure their playoff bye, of course, but
you want to try and get that top seed so you can just skip it immediately. But obviously, good to know, and good luck to V3 moving forward. Gentlemen, before we go on to our players of the week, is there anything you want to just mention quick offhand in regards to any teams, any players, or just anything of note?
I think I'm good, but I think we managed to cover each team pretty well.
All right, well, if you're both happy with it, gentlemen, it's time to do our players of the week. Sam, you need to make us some music for players of the week.
I'll get on it. Give me that clip and we'll make something up.
All right, just going.
There's a GIF incoming.
That is definitely potentially something. As we always do, I give top jungle. Our jungle expert takes it for Initia1ise, and then our mid expert gets to take it off, and then we follow in that order for the next few. Gentlemen, my top laner of the week was Nap. That wasn't hard for me. It was Nap. Initia1ise, your jungler. Oh, top laner.
Nap as well.
Nymaera?
It's Nap. We are in agreement.
Unanimous. And I mean, I think, Nymaera, you hit it perfectly earlier on with how good Nap was playing when we covered CGA. He is potentially just performing beautifully on this Wukong. He just didn't look like he was ever caught out in many spots, and they won both their games. So clearly he's doing something right with the rest of the team, right?
And it's also a thing about, if it would just been on the Wukong where he's performing well, that'd be something. But that he did it on the Ornn, which has been nerfed so many times.
That's true.
and
never enough.
And actually make it look like Ornn is like a team fight god as well. Because sometimes he can look a bit muted, particularly in the LJL. There are some players which I don't trust so much on the Ornn. Nap is no longer one of those players. This guy landed just ridiculous ults, like catching out Ezreal even after he's arcane shifting and stuff like that.
And this is Satori Mawashi on an Ezreal.
Yeah, so good at that champion.
He's so good at that champion. He's putting him under threat. It's not an unforced error. It's a forced error he's forcing them to make. They're using the tennis analogy and stuff like that. Nap just is such a point of pressure in team fights. What a guy.
Yeah, and no one even came close. And this is even with Paz also having a pretty decent week and beating both beat DFM. But we're like, nah, your Volibear was great. You went undefeated on it, but your Maokai, even though you did the correct role for your team, it wasn't on Nap level. And in all fairness, Nap was
extraordinary week for top laners. Just
it was phenomenal. In a few of these roles, it was our difficult one.
Absolutely.
Now, Initia1ise, can you take us over?
What was Steel for the jungle?
Okay. Nymaera?
I also went for Steel.
Ooh. I went for Boogie.
Okay, I can understand that.
It goes, minority first must defend their point, but I don't think there's going to be too much defending of their point, as Steel was definitely up there for me. I just think how Boogie played his Lee Sin, not in the traditional way, found himself losing game, but didn't necessarily have to be the sole carry. Identified that Archer and Ace and Paz were kind of, and Reiner were going to be more of what they needed, and he was going to be like, well, I'm going to have to fill the void here. I'm just going to insect a bunch of times. And then basically, when it came to late game, his whole goal was being the tank insect guy. And he did it beautifully about 2 times and got the win. And to be honest, his Nidalee was just a great fun one, and Tussle had no shot. So that was also a fun one, because I mean, screw Trundle players.
Yeah, there's something to that. So moving over to Steel, I guess. So obviously a lost versus V3 and against Boogie, and that course doesn't necessarily the best thing, because of course, you know, Boogie did go 2-0 in this, and Steel went 1-1. I was really impressed with Steel, like I was saying back in the DFM rundown of the standings. He controlled the map. He out jungled once as well. You know,
big time
from last week, or well, your guys. I was actually went for Boogie in that one. And his Pantheon had a lot of early pressure versus V3 as well. I think I just like the way this guy is controlling the game. He looks like he's quite confident in the way he's playing, and that's a bonus for DFM.
Yeah, like I think as well, particularly the game versus Burning Core was really great to watch from Steel. He comes out with a really great level 2 gank in the bot that puts Yuhi in an absolute
that was
hole.
huge. Yeah.
He manages to get the 1-for-1 with Echo as he comes diving in. He's all over the place. The Trundle to catch out the Medjai's Echo. He ends up that game, 7 and something?
7-3-10.
7-3-10, which is absurd. He does, that's fantastic.
Who gets 7 kills on a Trundle?
And then, like,
he didn't do a lot of damage that game, in all fairness, though. He was doing a fair bit of KSing from Utapong, who had 7 assists. That probably shouldn't have had 7 assists.
I mean, then we'll also say
going to be most kills in the week.
I know, shocking.
You count.
And then we'll also say, I think Steel versus Boogie, the early ward onto Boogie's red buff meant that Boogie got to do jack all for 20 minutes. He was 0-1-1, and Steel was everywhere. Managed to get great ganks up to the top side, but teamed up with Seros really well. Kind of controlled V3's mid and jungle very exceptionally, which I have credit for. DFM, I suppose, as a team, that's always a team job, but for Steel as well, that was good.
I was between 3 junglers this week, and honestly, it was kind of a bit of a toss-up, really. So I also want to shout out to Blank. I think Blank had a really good week. I think that particularly his first game versus Axis. Now, this guy was like 100% kill participation on 20 kills for his team as a Lee Sin when you've got a TF in your game. So I mean,
on your team, yeah.
With CGA. Yeah, it versus CGA as well.
You did it versus CGA as well. I also on the Lee Sin when you've got like globals on your team, and I'm like, this guy just knows where to be on the map, and his team revolves so very, very well. It's just, I think Steel controlled the map ridiculously well in his own right. And of course, Boogie, for all the reasons you said, is a worthy recipient of your award for that too. I'm not going to begrudge you that.
No, I think if we could have had 3 different picks here and everyone's right in their own way.
I wouldn't have been displeased.
Yeah. Nah, I'm also very scared to ever see Lee Sin picked for Blank again. Like, just...
Yeah, he's so good.
So scary.
All the right places.
If anything...
In the way that and Steel does too, but just Blank does it in just such a scary way.
If anything, Sengoku should play more around Blank and just go, okay, Blank, where do you want us? Here. All right, we're going.
It's like the opposite of SKT, where like Blank would just be like, "That's a Faker."
Oh, you shady bitch!
He's graduated. Oh, he's finally done it.
Congrats.
You shady bitch! As you look at your mouse mat of T1, going, oh, how things could have been.
You come to me on the day of my mid laner's wedding and ask me to gank her lane.
Oh dear. When I am Faker and I decide it all. Well, talking about Faker in the mid lane, Nymaera, can you start us off with...
It's such a meme at this point, but I do think Arya was my mid laner of the week.
Alright, well, my turn, and I will also join you on Arya. Go on, Initia.
Third verse, same as the first and second. I've got Arya as well.
And
Okay, so I don't find my point this time.
No, and in all fairness, I genuinely think he had the best games this week out of all the mid laners.
Yeah.
He had strong competition, but like it was this kind of conversation we had after the games where I was like, well, Ace actually didn't do horribly, but then it's like, as we were saying, he played far better on his Galio than the LeBlanc, and he was what the team needed, but he didn't do what the team could have had as well. He could have done it more cleanly. He could have won lane a bit harder. He could have prevented Syros a bit more. And it's these weird micro things, right?
The way I've reasoned it is, I look at each of the games.
Reasoned it. That sounds so bad.
If I switch any of these mid laners with another one, would they have performed better or worse or the same? And I look at Ace in particular. I think his Galio game was good, in fairness. I think the game versus DFM, as you were saying, he did what he needed to. But if you wanted to put like Pyrion maybe or Arya in there, they probably would have outperformed him the way they were playing this week. Whereas like I look at Arya, particularly on that Kalista mid, no one's doing that in the LJL.
No one's doing that worldwide.
Yeah, no one's doing that. And that's
okay, Chovy, sure, yeah.
It's like what you said about Syros back in like week 1 of spring, right? Week MVP. It's like what he does in the draft phase is so valuable. And at the end of the day, this is kind of like our MVP mid, and then we'll have our own overall MVP and stuff like that. But there needs I guess we all have our own criteria for it, but Arya is doing stuff which no one else is doing, and that's a really big thing for me. And he's doing it at such a high level.
I'll kind of say no. The game versus CGA, he wasn't the best, but like he was pretty damn good. The packages were all right, and it was also a really hard game for him because you've got Lee Sin, Galio, and Camille locking you into a cage for those first two to come and smack you down to face with Yuumi as well. Like that's hard work. So like that one, I give a little bit of a pass. Where he still played that game pretty well. Was roaming around, did end up 80 odd CS up. I mean, granted, it's against a Galio, Corky Galio late game things. We've all been there, but particularly the game versus the Justice was just stylish, right? The Kalista mid was stylish, and that gives a lot of points for me.
I think the only person that I maybe could have made an argument for was Pyrion. I think Pyrion had a really good game versus Axes. He just like played the TF, went 5-1-11, ridiculous amount of gold, ridiculous amount of pressure on the map. And then his Galio versus CGA, as you were saying like earlier in our rundown, he did a lot of damage on that pick. His team fights were nuts.
I think the part of my problem with Pyrion is just one or two of his ults just went a little bit astray, and I think that might have cost them a win. I need to definitely re-watch that. I've already watched it once since through. I definitely need to watch it a second time. I think... and it's very hard to say, oh, well, I think it was Pyrion's fault that they lost. No, I'm not putting that all on him. I just think there might have been, maybe if he had landed one of the extra one, maybe Sengoku just closed it out just a little bit better. I don't know.
Or before Gango gets items, you know?
Maybe.
Get the 2 inhibitors down, you get a team fight,
that
you
was
win.
That was when Gango was already there. I think he still could have actually turned it around. That's how close that game was for a period of time. It ended only with a 3k goal difference. Like that's. Yeah. But granted, all of that was probably on Yutori Moashi not having 3k. Which,
anyway, I'm slowly heading towards my secret Illuminati goal of making Arya the overall MVP.
Well, this week it wasn't too hard, in all fairness. I will now announce my AD carry of the week, and that, gentlemen, is Gango. Now, Initialize, who is your AD carry of the week?
I initially went with Gango, and I changed my
mind
mind through the rundowns, and I've gone for... I didn't change it! I changed the wrong one! I changed the wrong one! This is supposed to be that! I changed the wrong role! I changed the wrong role! It's supposed to be art. I changed the wrong category.
It said Gango, and now he quickly changed it, so... what
I typed the right...
Okay.
Yeah,
so, Nymaera?
I'll be the tiebreaker and bring things back into order, goddammit. It's Gango. It's Gango.
You don't get to play an AP... Oh, sorry. Initialize.
Go Sam.
Minority, you have to go first.
So what I will say is I think Gango had a killer week, and I had him down as the AD carry for like half of this podcast series, and I kind of went and looked at Art's games, and I went, there's nobody else on the Jesters who's helping him out right now. Like Hatchabetch is trying, but he's having a tough time. Cog's all right, but like he's got 2 substitutes. And, like he is desperately trying to carry, and he did a great job getting them the 1 win they've had this week. The 1 win they've had all split long. Did a fantastic job on the Ezreal. And against CGA as well, turned around that 4-man dive. In a 1v, or well, I suppose the Yumi was there. So a 2v4, 2v5 scenario. Nearly won out in the jungle with a 5-1 Kalista coming for his head. Like, there is little more that player could have done with so little support from people around him. Whereas I do think Gango, as amazingly as he played, think about how well Nap played those team fights to help him out. Think about how well Proud and stuff were playing. It was right. Gango and Grendel played this week as well, who had those kind of things where I go, you played super well, but there were a couple other players who were there helping you as well, who helped that look good.
Yeah. I think, so if we can then move over to in our defense of Gango. You know what you were talking about, Sam, in terms of how difficult it is to play some team fights. And you were talking about how difficult it was for Arya, for instance, on the Corki. Gango ended with like 20 kill participation out of 23 and had like 400 CS in a game where he was against Camille.
Like, I do not judge you guys picking Gango. Like,
and in that game,
totally reasonable.
So in this game, he had like 2 moments I remember where he flashed forward with the Severum running onto kill carries in a way where like he didn't even int, he like flashed forward to win team fights on an Aphelios, and that takes some cojones. Particularly when you know who you're up against.
Yes. Oh yeah, and 100%. I want to give the biggest honorable mention over to Archer.
Yeah,
because Archer, I was umming and ahhing.
Yeah.
In all fairness, I never put Art even into my shortlist. It was only ever Archer or Gango. But now that I see your reasoning, I totally get it. Yeah, he's the only member on Rascal Jester, really, outside of maybe Cog, who's doing something.
Yeah.
And even then, Cog's got to basically not lose lane.
Like, I'll have some credit for Hatchabetch at points, like finding ways back into games.
Yeah.
But I know exactly what you mean.
But yeah, oh god, Archer basically did exactly what Gango
fight,
did. But Gango showed me something which gives him huge brownie points. As we all know, I love the pick and ban phase. Picking AP support bot laners, and then you just get to shit on people if you're good. And he's so fucking good.
Yeah, because
things are like flexibility as well.
We had a lot of issues with Gango in terms. So he played Talia Pantheon bot last split, and it was awful. It was genuinely
really
very bad. This is when CJ went on that loss streak, and it looked like things were kind of the lights were going out.
Grendel's Pantheon was.
Yeah,
there were no lights. Like, it was a submarine.
They weren't quite making those build deadlines, and they were starting to turn off the power in the house. And but with this cast coming in bot, particularly against Pink's Katarina, like I said, there were a couple of points where the miasma goes down onto him. There's one around CGA's blue buff where things were getting really, really close, and he's in the bush. He puts the miasma in the bush, so it's out of vision. And then Katarina walks in trying to finish off the kill, is grounded, can't do anything, and they lose the team fight off of that. And also some really clutch stopwatch plays from him as well, around the enemy blue buff just outside the wolves as well. This guy knows his limits, and he's playing much like early spring split Gango, being super aggressive, knowing his damage limits, and doing really, really well.
But on top of that, he also made Initialize Horse on his Aphelios, which gives me huge, bigger maybe brownie points, because his Aphelios, I thought he was dead. I streaked going, it's over. Sengoku have won this, but I forgot who he had on his team.
3v5, man. Yumi and Ornn will do wonders to keep you alive, it turns out. And he just like, well, thank you for the ball. Let me obliterate you.
It was mental. I mean, that was a clip that you ended up posting onto social media.
Oh, sorry, Thresh. Yeah.
And I mean, that was because of how good it was. That was just a phenomenal game, and I am glad to have cast it alongside you. Sorry, Nymaera, for taking that one away. But you did get the V3 one. Where
No. I also just got to sit there like a fanboy, really, because things are like I really like Sengoku. I really love CJ. I think they're both really juxtaposed teams. I love seeing both of them. They have players I'm very fond of on both teams, and like seeing them go right down to the wire. I could not have hoped for a more entertaining game. It was that good.
So good. Initialize. Sir, after our gushing over Gango and the AD carries, can you present us with your support, sir?
Was it ever going to be anybody else? It's Reiner.
Fair. Nymaera?
It's also Reiner.
Oh, that's 3 for 3 for Reiner. No surprises here. Who wants to take this one?
Okay, right. This man plays everything so damn well, and his Thresh in particular is just unreal. Like, I cannot begin to tell you that fight in the mid lane versus DFM. If he had not landed that hook, Utapon gets to free fire on a half item advantage. That is bad news. In a team fight around the Dragon Pit, he flays an invisible Wukong going for a Cyclone off of Archer's back. It is insane. He lands the hook onto Seros, looking to port out at the last possible second to stop the port. Like, this man is out of his mind good right now.
He has played 4 games of Thresh, got a KDA of 13. He played one game. He played one game of Yuumi, got an 11 KDA, and then played one game of Set, where he decided he wanted to be the only form of initiation for his team, and then still gets a positive KDA of 6.5, which is a normal support KDA. Why are you so good? How are you this good? Where were you this spring? Oh my god, summer's looking great.
Reiner in spring was good, but verging on great, right? He was our second best support, but this, like, I don't know if this is a bold statement or not, but this is like the first time I can remember in recent LJL history where like it's kind of made me forget about Gang a bit.
Yeah,
I completely forgot about Gang. In all
Fairness,
seriousness,
Gang has been great.
Gang had some really good bard games, and then he's stuck on time tension. Sure, that doesn't help in a lot of ways. But this guy, like, it doesn't matter what he's playing. Like Lexi's saying, he just finds ways into a game, particularly in that V3 versus DFM game. And we're talking about the flay onto the Wukong. There's also some really good use of the box, which is something Thresh players can sometimes misuse quite a lot. So this is the fight in the river where, like, again, Ebby's trying to go for the Cyclone, and because of the slow of the box, he doesn't quite reach Archer. And because of the flay, he doesn't quite reach Archer. And because Archer's not quite reached, he just runs over DFM. And that's what really makes Archer shine to me. And part of the reason I did put Archer as MVP because I'm just like, crap, he's with Reiner. He's with Reiner.
I know.
I was saying this in the team rundown as well. Part of what makes V3 look so good is that they have the perfect combination of players. Like Ace looks good because he's playing the right role for the rest of his team because he doesn't have to be the primary damage source. Archer's doing that really well. And they don't necessarily need someone to have all that map pressure because Boogie's doing that really well. And Reiner just props up everything else with everything he does. He is by far the best support in the LJL right now. He's just so good.
And what's insane is he's only about halfway in a lot of average stats in the LJL. So he doesn't have crazy stats unless it comes to KDA stuff. He has very average stuff, which just means the rest of the supports in the LJL are doing the same sort of thing in lane. But the second it leaves a laning phase, everybody else goes, all right, guys, I'm going to keep doing the same thing over. And Reiner just goes, what? No, the game's completely different now, guys. Like, you leave lane at level 6. You go around the map, and he's just doing so much of this so smart. And yeah, true. Gang has been put on Tom Kench duty for this week. Didn't help him at all. Normally, he's a big...
His second Tom Kench game was actually really clean. Yeah, like, some of the devours he's pulling off there were very good in tower aggro.
It's like a Yuumi game.
In some ways, yeah. Just the base utility of those champions is pretty high, and it means that you're... it's like... when you're given advice to climb, particularly back in like season 7, yes, climbs and support, you play Janna, you play Nami because like they have a base utility, which means you don't have to hit skill shots. It means you don't have to like position correctly. You just have to do like these simple cookie cutter plays where like you put the shield on the right target, put the right heal, you devour at the right time, and that's kind of it. Whereas with Thresh, like everything's very involved, and Reiner just abuses what you can do with that champion. It's really fun to watch.
Well, Nymaera, will you do us the pleasure of your overall player of the week?
Considering I nearly put like 4 players from the same team as player of the week, it's really awkward to try and choose one of them. It is going to be top lane, though. It's Nap.
Okay, I have picked Reiner.
That's fair.
Initialize?
Totally reasonable. I ummed and ahed between the two of your picks, but I did go for Nap in the end. My days that on, my boys.
No, I'm more than happy for either of these players, but of course, minority likes to take it away.
This man knows no bounds. He's on the only team that's undefeated. He played 2 different champions this week, and Well, there's no denying that both games he was incredibly important. The Yuumi game was, arguably kind of... Oh, no, wait, that was week 3. That was week 2. Week 3 was Set and Thresh this week, and it was just beautiful. His Set basically won them a team fight versus the Hawks. He just decided, screw it, I'm going to go in the middle of it. Boom, flash in, pull you all together. This game's going. GG. GG, yeah. GG, and the support just gets to do that. Paz didn't die that game because Reyna did all the initiation. What's going on? This is okay. And then game 2, he lands every critical hook to basically prevent so much of DFM's power and just go slap them all away. No, I'm Reyna. Screw you. Game's mine. And I mean, it was. He ended that game with a 100%. Kill participation on a Thresh. How insane is that? Insane.
It's pretty insane. Pretty insane.
That is why Reyna was my MVP of this week. And I think, as you both have said, Nap was well deserving from my point of view as well. So I'm not doing any flame. I just really wanted to...
It had to be one of the two. It had to be one of the two.
100%. Only those two, really.
Potentially you could vote for the AD carries, but we all know that AD carries are the products of that team, right? Because Gango would not have got his triple kill in that last team fight if it weren't for Nap with maybe the best or knockup I've ever seen. Maybe, because it was that clutch, and it allows allows Gango. So I was looking at the wrong thing to just like auto with the Infernum, and he's like got his Severum running as well at different points in there. It buys enough time for another 7,000 damage coming. It's that much because it's like 3 full health bars just deleted.
Yeah,
that's all because
they don't win that game. They don't win that. No, they lose it if he doesn't hit that.
In 3 fights in a row, he hit a multi-man Call of the Forge Guard into Q Searing Charge. And 3 fights in a row. Like the first one around the inhibitor where he gets all 5. He gets another one where the next one, he reads the Ezreal Arcane Shift. That last one gets 3 members up that gets Gango. That is absurd levels of team fight play from the guy. And his other game was on a Wukong when we've already said he is the best Wukong in the league. He went 5-3-11 against the Jesters and kind of leveled up their team.
Hog in the 1v1 with Wukong against an Ornn, which is a matchup where they just meant to look at each other and farm. He then promptly said, screw that, I'm going to win the lane. What? Well, you don't win lane as Wukong. You don't. And he's like, I want to. Fine, Nap. Fine. I'm getting all gushy about Nap, and I didn't put him as my MVP.
Yeah. So it's also worth noting, in the game versus Sengoku, he almost out-damaged the Camille. He only did 3k less. It's 19, almost 20,000 from the Camille, almost 17,000 from the Ornn. And I know that 3,000 can be quite a lot, but when you think about Ornn, he only really does that damage in team fights rather than poking out through laning phase of the Camille. So that means that all of his damage he's done is within these big team fights. And you think how close those team fights were? That's where the extra damage came from. It's from the Ornn. Particularly landing that Call of the Forge Guard onto you told him Ashy. And I think he won that mental game because sometimes you saw the Arcane Shift come out and then get hit anyway, so you'd actually get hit by both parts of the ult. And that's pretty big in its own way, because you told him actually had a bit of a stinker, and he hasn't had one of those since finals, really. But Nap, again, like I said, it is a forced error, not an unforced error. And Nap is just made the game so hard to play for Sengoku because they thought they had it. And it turns out one's a really good team fight disengaged champion for your hyper engage. And yeah, the guy's just so good. So good.
So good indeed. That rounds us up of our Players of the Week section on the podcast. And we're not doing too bad for time, actually. Hour and a half in so far. Good. I'm very happy with this timing. Gentlemen, it's time to go over to one of our favourite subjects where we'll never have music for it, but we'll always do it horribly in sync. It will be MetaTalk.
MetaTalk. I'm already out of tune. Let's not do that.
Wow, this is really bad compared to the first time we did it.
All right, we're doing that again. We're leaving that there.
No, we're going.
No,
MetaTalk.
Right. Okay.
We've only really got one subject we're really going to talk about, but it's going to be a pretty interesting one. It's something that Nymaera identified on cast.
So it kind of came up when we saw a couple of different AD carries being picked and a couple of mid laners being picked as well, which we potentially weren't as prepared for. We kind of brought it up in the picks and bans, but it all comes down to this very vague heading which stretches over quite a few things in globals. The LJL this week picked, let's have a look. So there was 1 in the mid lane, 2 in the mid lane, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games of global champions being played. Well, 8 champions which have globals, so that basically covers all of our rosters for this week. So we saw a lot of Ashe, we saw a lot of Galio, and we saw a lot of TF. And why is the LJL picking this? Why is it important? And Time Crunch and Pantheon as well, so actually it's more than that. And do you guys think it works out in what they were trying to achieve this week?
I mean, the teams that won played one global ult game and one non-global ult game on their full lineup for V3, so it's not a necessity. But no. I think what your point is does it benefit these teams? And maybe. I mean, Crest Gaming Act also just didn't play any globals in their teams, and they also went 2-0. So it's a.
This is the litmus test for me because I was saying last week, like CGA, they're not good versus group fights, and they really don't like splitting the map. Ooh, that's kind of so. If they don't win a group fight, well, what do? Oh man, maybe you can just wave clear and just split the map against them. Sengoku tried that, and they tried to make the numbers advantage, and DFM tried that versus V3, and both of those games ended up in losses because they lost the team fights. For me, I like where it's coming from the direction. Because I like that you can see that a lot of the teams here, they love fight around objectives. Stop stacking up towards the Dragon Soul, because that's a big thing in the LJL. It's a big thing for a lot of regions, don't get me wrong. But particularly, for instance, G2, they're winning a lot without Baron. And some teams can do that across the globe, but they use objectives to get something else on the map. And the LJL is slowly moving towards that with these globals. But the execution's not there. Because we see stuff like Seros trying to teleport into a team fight and getting stopped by a hook. Or it's Corporal, unfortunately, missing a Pantheon onto mid lane, or the same with Proud on Burning Core trying to do that into the top lane, and Ebby just kind of walking away. For me, I like what they're doing, but the execution's not there yet.
Also, we saw a lot of whiff Galio ults where they were ulting onto a target that was no longer in the team fight or was already demised, and the team fight had already moved over several inches, and it was like...
That's the problem with Galio. That's why you play it with something like Camille. But the problem is, can you save someone with the Death Stance? Well, rather, can you kill someone with the Death Stance? We saw with Gango. Actually, a lot of the time you can't.
And like, there's something to like the ceiling on a global comp can sometimes be higher just because of the options and opportunities you can have across the map. You broaden what you can do. Your fallback patterns are more limited. A team fight comp can always find a way to team fight, if you know what I mean. Whereas actually, if a global comp that's forced into a 5v5, sometimes that's not really what you actually need to be doing, like, and that can be problematic. And we saw that, say, a great example would be that DFM V3 game. It was a great game. I thought it was actually pretty high level from both squads. I thought they really tested each other. V3 come out on top because actually DFM come with a massive lead, but they could always fall back to team fighting in a way that DFM then tried to fall back to team fighting and realized, oh god, this Aphelios has 3 cleanses and we have no way of shutting him down.
So there are 2 really big plays from DFM this week, which I really like from them. One was when Boogie tries to catch out Initia1ise on the bottom lane, and then all the globals come in, and it turns out really badly for V3. And then there's the one where they catch out once on the Echo, like I said earlier, where they get the Trundle pillar down to force out the Echo ultimate, and then TF just ults in. And then you have stuff like there's one fight around the red buff Baron for Sengoku, where they ult onto Gango, and it just doesn't matter. Because like they try and go in for this pile-on fight, try and get a numbers disadvantage, but it turns into a 5v5 anyway, and it just doesn't gain them anything because they've champions with globals are often balanced around those globals and balanced around. Okay, so if you can be anywhere on the map, when you get there, you don't have as much efficacy. So if you're in a straight 5v5 with a global, it doesn't necessarily mean you're at the advantage just because of your stats. But yeah, no, I thought that was the thing for me this week, which I thought the LJL was trying to head towards. We'll track that going through the next couple of weeks, seeing if they do develop this style or whether they just fall off it.
I think it will be interesting to see. We've already seen the LJL obviously lean heavily, like a lot of other regions, on TP in both at least 2 roles, which is
big time. Sengoku, especially.
Yeah, a lot of teams are running at least 2, sometimes 3, depending on their AD carries or their. Well, actually, it's only depending on their AD carries, and normally only that's really Ezreal, as you can get away with it on Ezreal. But it's definitely an interesting point of view. I don't know if the whole metagame is fully shifting into playing fully around globals, but it'll be a nice thing that a lot of teams, if they can have it in their repertoire to bring out if needed, because till you show us, it's not going to be something that we can go, oh, well, you just got outdrafted because you didn't draft a good well against the team that's just going to outsplit push you, and you just go, can't team fight because they keep fight pressuring us, but we lose, and then you just go, well, don't do that. Don't do that.
You're not good enough, don't do it.
Part of the way you deal with a global comp is you go to the source of the global and you engage on it, right? And fitting into both sides of this is Ashe, which has been picked a lot. Well, being seen more and more. We saw 2 games of it, one from Utapon and one from, I'm trying to remember who the other person was that picked it this week. But then last week, Gango played it on CG as well. I think part of it is that
he
it's
picked it, remember?
Yeah, oh, you had a bit of the awkward game on it. But you can see where basically you have this Ashe ult, which is a global itself. It's long-range engage onto someone that might want to move, though. Particularly TF, if you secure vision from bot lane river and then you just fire it up there's a good chance you just land it on TF and he dies. And that's really good. So Ashe is kind of this budget Varus, but also has that global pressure. So yeah, I like that people are kind of going towards that. And the LPL's picked it quite a bit too, so obviously it's going right somewhere.
It's the 3rd most picked bot laner in the LPL.
It's like after the S tier of like Aphelios, Kalista, Ezreal, I think it's then
Kalista's
Ashe.
banned more, so Ashe has played more.
Played more, but the presence is higher from Kalista.
Yes, yeah. Higher presence, but more plays, which is what I'm leaning into.
Right, I'm with you, because it's available.
It's more available, which is the normal thing, because Varus is 100% ban rate in the LPL, so obviously then it falls down to everybody else, and Aphelios is still Mr. 200 doing a crazy numbers, as we saw this week. Gentlemen, that kind of leaves us with only one question of the week, and it took me a brief moment to understand what I think the question is meaning, but I think the person, which is Sake, wants to kind of know, why do we think V3 were able to actually top the table, obviously defeating both Sengoku and DFM, but how do we think, and CGA, like, how do we actually think they've been able to kind of change and become this top team of the week, well, so far of the LJL?
So I guess we're going to talk about the mechanisms in which they've done that, their play style and how they managed to like get towards the top. And it is a multifaceted argument. I think a part of it is something we touched on last week. Ace has managed to find a role within his team. He's found an active champion pool, which is larger than the last split. It wasn't just LeBlanc and Syndra, and like a couple of oddball picks like Rumble in the mid lane. He's picked up stuff like the Galio, which is working really well with high pressure junglers, and he's picked up stuff like the Karma mid as well, which works really well when you've got multiple carries on your team, like Boogie and Archer as well. So that's one part of it, but I'm sure you guys have got some other things to bring in.
The drafting has been really strong for V3 in that the comps they get and then the plans they have with that comps in the first 10 minutes have generally been very, very strong. The decision to go vertical jungling really early, the level 1 plans into bot dives with Ace kind of sacking lane versus Arya and turning up, Nidalee Galio duos, like aggressive level 1s picking Ignite on Ezreal to make sure you can win that level 1 2v2. That kind of smart play and decisive action looks really, really good from them.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I really like from them also, to really just hammer the point home, is that they are not forcing their players to play the same picks unless they want to play them. Someone like Ace keeps going back to the Galio because that seems to be a comfort pick, but has played Karma from him. We've seen the LeBlanc, as well as also in week 1 we saw him play the LeBlanc and the Galio again. He can play the same, but then Boogie's played all kinds of different stuff. They can basically play sort of the same champions over and over again, but they don't have to.
He's had a lot of Syndra bans versus him too. You know, he's still got other stuff on there. He's drawing other stuff in the pick and man phase, which is nice.
Yeah, and this is nothing to say that obviously Reiner hasn't been able to just play a bunch of. He's been able to spam Thresh games and wins on them, and then when when Honey and Pooh, the 1,000-acre bot lane, as Initia1ise has coined it, when they go, we're gonna take the Thresh away because I really like Thresh, Reiner just goes, nice, set, kill your team, cool, and then Paz has played brought out the Volibear, the first and only Volibear we've currently seen.
Natsume's played it.
I've already forgotten.
But that was NT then taking the altered Volibear with his additional HP and showstoppering him into the hole of his team. And it turns out that people who gain extra HP are juicy targets for set.
Me likey.
Me likey long time. It was very, very scary. Volibear was just absurd in that game, whereas on the opposite end, it was less absurd for
Yeah, so I think the big thing for V3 is that all of the players know their role within the team, regardless of the champions they're playing, and that's a big thing. So Archer knows that he's going to be the guy that's kind of fallen back on team fights, and that's fine. And the rest of the team know that, and they will set Archer up for success. Boogie knows he is the early pressure man. He's there to shore up the lanes and play around priority, and the rest of the team know that he's going to be playing. He's going to be doing the battle ward. He's going to be walking into the enemy jungle trying to steal buffs, and set up the vertical jungle and stuff like that. Reiner and Boogie are kind of left as the initiator playmakers as well. And Paz is just this rock in the top lane where he knows he's probably playing weak side, but he has options and stuff like the Wukong to also do other stuff, right? They're more versatile than they were in spring. That's a big thing because we kind of thought that Boogie had to be on a select couple of champions. Now he's expanded that and stuff like Trundle as well. And that's a big thing too. In fact, his Trundle arguably for me has been his most interesting pick.
Paz has played more champions this split than he did in spring.
He's played 4 champions.
He's 4 champion already. Wait, oh, he's matched it then. He's already matched it with this week with the Volibear, which is absurd.
Yeah. So like, I'll also add in a couple last things here as well. In that, specifically, why has this led them to defeating DFM and Sengoku Gaming, which is a valid question to be asking. There's a couple things in that actually. The roles also really fit the meta right now. Yeah, basically saying, this guy Boogie, who you may or may not have heard of as like probably the best jungler in the league, is being given things like Lee Sin, Nidalee, Graves, like to do dirty things on. Fantastic. Bot lane's kind of a priority right now with things like Aphelios. Oh, we've got this great Aphelios player around about. That really helps.
But but then Boogie can play Trundle still.
Sure, well, Trundle's another really priority pick right now, and exactly. But this kind of meta thing
role, right?
is yeah, exactly. But the meta is really fitting how they play as a team right now, which is great.
And Ace has found ways to survive in lane and also be impactful on the map, and that's a really big thing. Because he was good at reliability beforehand. Sometimes he'd just lose lane and struggle to impact team fights. He has the right champions to survive that now.
Yeah, didn't die versus the 1v1 against Arya. Actually had more presence in the game than Arya did, which is big praise to say.
Yeah, because on another matchup, if they drafted it differently, he could have been hammered. And he's still, so I think V3 they're self-aware. I think that's the big thing which we'd come to. So like as an outside observer, like we have certain assumptions about that team, and it seems like they are playing around those assumptions, which even we share with them, right? The last big thing
I just love the idea that the V3 logo is becoming self-aware of itself. It's like an entity going, oh, what am I? Oh, I'm like some wings.
I think therefore I win LJL.
That's how it works.
I've got the last little thing I kind of wanted to bring up as well before we kind of move on as well was there's also something specifically for why are they defeating DFM and Sengoku Gaming. There's also an element of they are winning those micro clutch moments too. So before, when the game plan doesn't work, and they have got great game plans, and we're praising them for that. When it doesn't work out, the DFM game probably the biggest example. When you are down 6,000 gold, when it is looking really dire, AI bots 85% against you. That, those moments, the fact that you can fall back on, actually our players are good enough to challenge these guys who we thought were kind of untouchable on a mechanical level and win that mechanical outplay is a big deal too. And that's big praise to the likes of Reiner on the Thresh. It is big praise to people like Boogie, who I've got good picks to be doing that with. It's praise to people like Archer, who is positioning so damn well in team fights.
They just got so many options open to them, and they can always lean back on multiple different players. Nymaera, what were you gonna bring up, sir?
So I think that V3 are just very quick to commit all as 5. And it's like kind of in the CGA standard of, if everyone's doing the wrong thing, then it's suddenly the right thing if they're doing it at the right time. They did that versus DFM and that 1-5 versus Ebby. It's the lethal mindedness, which not many LJL teams have. CGA have it, but this is more tempered from V3. So I think this is why V3 are that level above CGA. We saw that in their victory versus them. But why did they win versus Sengoku? I think a lot of it was kind of grasp on the win conditions, which is something which Sengoku did really well in spring. They knew how to get a win condition, like stacking up towards Dragon Soul, scaling up to the Ezreal, stuff like that. Whereas against Sengoku, they know that if they could force Sengoku into really bad fights with playing around a Kayn, the Kayn would not have as much impact as a Trundle. They ended up snowballing around that. The Galio came in really big with his semi-global. That's something which we talked about earlier. And they have a really good read on the meta. They're very quick to commit to fights, and they know how to do that in regards to their win conditions. Against Sengoku and DFM, you can see that in various fights. There's the one where Galio ults for one of the first times up in the top river against Sengoku. Against DFM, it's the one where Ebby gets caught, turns into a team fight victory, and then the team fight after that, where V3 also force a fight and DFM respond very poorly. These kind of fights, the ones where you're like, okay, they know what they're doing in terms of their win conditions. They're very quick to commit. That's a good thing in regards to them in the league.
Yeah. Any last thoughts on that?
I suppose we rambled a little bit there around various things. So maybe recapping it is great win conditions, great plan early on to get to those win conditions, good fallback strats or good fallback mechanics if those win conditions are kind of getting taken away from them.
Yeah, and they are doing that against everybody in the table. No one has been truly able to defeat them and find the nexus to blow it up. So V3 will keep taking them wins and them Ws until someone stops them in their tracks. Gentlemen, this means we have hit the end of the podcast. That is the end of episode 21 for us here. Now, as always, I pass it over to Nymaera and Initia1ise for any closing thoughts they have around the LJL or just in general.
I am super happy with our top teams right now.
You're happy. You like the teams. Good. All right.
Just in terms of they all look pretty competitive, and the way they are playing the game impresses me mostly. I think we are seeing good growth of them. They are testing each other, and I think that leads us to a pretty good playoff state when we get there.
I thought you were doing the whole caveman thing of good teams up top, good meat like boom, hit stick. Doing the full Trundle roleplay, I thought maybe.
Yeah.
No.
Another time.
Another time. Okay, absolutely.
That's 100, right?
Oh my god, is he gonna? Oh my god, Initia1ise is gonna cosplay Trundle? Yo!
He wasn't ready.
Oh!
It's only. I know we're brothers, buddy, but you don't need to look in the mirror and pass it on to me.
Damn! I can't. Nymaera, closing thoughts.
I think if I looked in the mirror, I'd like drop to silver. If that's what you're insinuating, if we're the same, there, then
it's Legends rank. Asked to get dragged into
because it's actually, if I'm Trundle, you're my pillar of trash.
Oh shit!
There we go.
Oh,
there we go.
Trash is still. Well, you're unranked, so actually I'm like 5 divisions higher than you.
Through that. Through that.
Okay. So anyway, my closing thoughts are, I think that this week has probably had the highest level of individual play from the LJL this year. I think looking at the players of the weeks and their performances, we've seen some ridiculous team fights and ridiculous individual performances. So there's a lot to look out for, at least at the top of the table, like Sam was saying. I have some worries down there at the bottom end of the standings, some alarm bells ringing. I think that particularly losing Rascal Jess as that top tier team has been quite disheartening.
Sad.
But it doesn't mean like the rest of the teams aren't carrying on regardless and showing us some really good stuff. So things to look forward to as an LJL fan. I hope that they keep this up. I hope they continue to improve, because if they do, World's play-ins looking pretty fun.
World's play-ins and playoffs are definitely something that we are beginning to think about. The top table and bottom of the table now does have that 2-game disparity, which means anyone on the bottom side needs to do at least 2 wins, and you have to be Burning Core and the Hawks to even think about that kind of parity for them. So it is going to be the battle of playoff placing, and it's very important, as we saw going into playoffs. So Worlds is definitely on the cards. Lots of teams want it. Who is going to take it? Only way to find out is if you keep listening and watching our content, in all seriousness. So for myself, Alex, otherwise known as Lexico by MaskedSwan, Nymaera and Initia1ise, thank you so much for listening and or watching, and we'll see you all very, very soon.